Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the beginning of the WikiCite 2020 virtual conference. This is the first time we run a virtual edition of this almost annual conference, and it is the fourth WikiCite annual conference. Today we have a series of sessions by a variety of people in various topics, but we are starting with, let's call it the keynote, the state of WikiCite in 2020. But to introduce them, my name is Liam Wyatt and the host of the conference in general. But to introduce Daniel and this particular session, I'd like to introduce Jakob and Eva. Welcome and thank you for hosting this session today.
Yeah, hello and welcome from the side of both of us, the hosts for this session. Yeah, we are happy to present Daniel Mietchen. To introduce Daniel, he's virtually everywhere. So everywhere in Wikidata world. Each time I discover a new interesting Wikidata related project, I'm sure he has already seen it or he has an opinion in it, and he has a strong, well-founded opinion, and that's why it's very interesting to listen to what he's going to talk about. So we welcome Daniel Mietchen, and yeah, are you ready? Then the screen is yours.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, we will leave.
So, thank you, everyone. I'll just start by noting that the slides are available on Zenodo. I also just tweeted them, so you can follow at your own pace. There is a back channel for comments. So if there is anything that you would like to comment on, or if you have a question during the talk, please put it in this Etherpad, w.wiki/igk with the GK in capitals. And from the Etherpad, we will also then take the Q&A section. I try to talk for 45 minutes about that, and then we have about 15 minutes for questions. But this is flexible and I can be interrupted, that's fine. So structure of the talk, I'll say hello. Then we will look at some previous versions of the state of WikiCite 2020, because you might have seen in the title, this is version 3. I'll give an overview of WikiCite in general, and then the WikiCite development since the last official WikiCite meeting, 2018 in Berkeley. And in this overview, I'll look at the content, at some of the infrastructure, at grants and fellowships, and also at events, including further events as part of this WikiCite conference. There will be mechanisms for you to get involved, and then there will be Q&A. Okay, hello WikiCite, I was introduced already. This slide is more or less just for people who were stumbling upon this randomly on the internet when they watched the YouTube recordings. So now let's look at WikiCite 2020, the previous versions. So one important previous version is the annual report. As Liam already pointed out, we have roughly annual events, which also means we have roughly annual reports. The latest one is for 2019-20. And I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I encourage you to take a look at this. In any case, here is a brief summary. So the WikiCite annual report 2019 and 2020 was detailing some events that were planned and actually held. So for this period, we were actually planning to go decentral. We wanted to have a more multilingual and more diverse set of events taking place. And that involved thoughts about going virtual from the beginning. And we had 2 events actually taking place, one in Australia, one in Czechia. But then the COVID-19 pandemic has changed many of those plans. So the event in Czechia had to be cut short by a day. Events planned in Ireland and Finland had to be modified. Events in Ghana, Germany, and India had to be cancelled. Yeah, I was actually meant to speak at this event in Germany for the talk that I'm giving now. Events in Haiti and Ghana had to be postponed. I'm glad to report that by now, the one in Haiti has actually taken place. And the pandemic has also triggered, for instance, Wiki Project COVID-19, which had a strong WikiCite component. Other ecosystem around WikiCite is evolving in terms of the Wikimedia strategy and Wikidata, Wikibase strategy. And everything that's underlined here in my slides is linked, so I encourage you to explore those links. Yeah, so the second version of the State of WikiCite 2020 was a talk that I gave at the workshop on Open Citations and Open Scholarly Metadata 2020 at the beginning of September. Back then, I didn't know that I would be giving this talk here, and I wasn't sure whether there would be any kind of overview of WikiCite talk this year, which is why I gave it that title back in September. On the other hand, I had only very little time, so I couldn't go into details. And I'm reusing some of the slides from there, but still the structure of the talk is different. The key takeaway from that talk is, despite the pandemic, WikiCite is moving forward, but we're actually not so sure about the citation part. And that talk is online as well, including some video recording. So now we're on to version 3. Let's start with an overview of WikiCite. I assume that some people are here that don't know really what that is about, and so I hope to add a little bit of clarity and reduce a bit of the confusion. So WikiCite is a community. It's a socio-technical platform that connects this community with an ecosystem of projects, tools, and other activities. It's also, or can be seen as, a collection of data sets, a series of events, and a number of other things. Let's zoom into some of those. So the community, if I go by 2016 conference, it outlined the vision to create the sum of all human citations as linked open data. This is inspired by the Wikimedia vision to create the sum of all human knowledge. And from that, we derived the mission, which is still up on the WikiCite page on the Meta Wiki, to develop open citations and linked bibliographic data to serve free knowledge using Wikimedia platforms and especially Wikidata. That vision and mission have led us to consider a number of goals. I'm again quoting the 2016 version of them. Lay the foundations for building a repository of all Wikimedia references as a structured data in Wikidata. That's one goal. And the other one is to design data models and technology to improve the coverage, quality, and standards compliance and machine readability of citations across Wikimedia projects. That's what the plan was in 2016. And somewhere between these two, we're actually still active. It's just that by now we've zoomed in onto those things into so many different directions, some of which I'll try to outline. The next aspect of that community is that the community has a roadmap that offers essentially 4 roads to travel, but that roadmap is not really used much. Everybody travels on their own, everybody finds their way on their own, and the roadmap is decisions that the roadmap is about. They're still kind of looming. At some point, they need to be taken, or they will be taken by someone or something. And so it's probably worth for the community to just keep it in mind and maybe have some more active discussions about this. Next, so I mentioned it's also a technological platform. So it has a home base on the Meta Wiki under the WikiCite basically handle. And from there, you can also find the program for this week's conference, but lots of other documentation about WikiCite in general. Its home base on Wikidata is Wiki Project source metadata, which was actually the nucleus from which WikiCite has grown. And Wiki Project source metadata is a bit of a mouthful, and also it was specific to Wikidata. So by now we've come to use the term WikiCite to encompass, to signal that it's not just for Wikidata, it's really on Meta because it concerns all Wikimedia projects. But yeah, the nucleus, the origin of this is that we wanted to care for source metadata, and that included citations. So it's important to keep in mind that Wikidata is about 1/3 just citations and scholarly publications. So about 1/3 of the content of Wikidata is curated by the WikiCite community. Problems. And so the problems of Wikidata, they reflect on WikiCite and vice versa. And then finally, yes, WikiCite is a series of events. We were in Berlin in 2016, in Vienna 2017, and in Berkeley 2018, and now we're trying to be a bit more global this year. So I mentioned Wikidata a number of times. Most of you will know what it is, but I suspect some will not. So here is an attempt. Like Wikipedia, which is the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit, Wikidata is the free knowledge base that anyone can edit and use, of course. If that doesn't clarify this to you, then I recommend to look at this 7-minute intro video on YouTube that I've linked. So a few more numbers about Wikidata from the perspective of WikiCite. So Wikidata as a whole has 11 billion statements that come in the triple form, like subject, predicate, object. And for us, the most interesting for us are, for instance, citations, 170 million, scholarly articles, 36 million, items that have a digital object identifier for publications or datasets, 26 million, ORCIDs, which is an identifier for researchers, 1.5 million. And then also, that's the curation work that's going on. The links from the publications to the top wrote the publications, roughly 20 million links. Links from the people to the institutions where they were educated, 1.5 million. And from the people to where they're working, it's about 1 million. And all of these data, since we're talking linked data and open data, they can be mixed and mashed in different fashions and reused and enrich each other. So now let's talk a little bit about the curation workflows that are employed by the WikiCite community. I'll single out like 3 of them here. I mentioned 4 of them on the slide, but due to time and stuff, I'll go only into 3 of them. So one is topic tagging, which allows us to address questions like, give me all the papers about SARS-CoV-2 or any other specific topic. The other one is author disambiguation, which allows to address questions like, give me all the papers by a given person. The other one is ontology development, like, for instance, if you want to get all papers about mathematics education, and you want to include different aspects of mathematics education, then you will need to map those aspects like calculus, for instance, or algebra or geometry education. You need to map them to math education. That's called ontology development. So basically linking topics and subtopics. And then the last one is subject affiliation. If you want to get an overview of the publications from a given institution, and many institutions want to get that overview, then somehow you need to record that there is the link between the person and the institution, and then between the person and the publications. And then through linked data, we can harvest that and make the link from the publications to the institutions. Okay, an example of topic tagging. Here I chose a query that gives me terms that have Bologna in them in the titles of publications. So from that, I can see that there are different kinds of Bologna that are being talked about. So Bologna in general, there's Bologna, Italy, like there's the province of Bologna, there's the city of Bologna, the University of Bologna. Bologna experience, which refers to a number of things. Then there are some clinics in Bologna, Bologna sausage, and so on. So disambiguation is very important. But once we have disambiguated things, because we have the rather precise topics here in Wikidata, which all have their own identifier, we can then clearly distinguish the literature about the sausage from the literature about the university and the clinic and the province and the city. Then the most popular tags for topics of publications as of August 2020 were these ones here. Mostly medical. That's because that just shows some bias that we have. That's partly because in medicine, biomedicine, we have databases that are more easily harvestable, that can be more easily integrated in Wikidata than in other fields. But it's not only biomedicine. So, for instance, we see India popping up here, nanoparticle and statistics. So it's a bit more complex than that. Here, I'm bringing up the Zika virus as an example because it served as an example already since 2016. It's kind of the guinea pig, the testing ground for WikiCite workflows. And this is in part because WikiCite developed roughly in parallel to the Zika virus epidemic in 2015-16. But also because this Zika virus corpus or dataset has been used in a number of contexts, and also it helped address the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So what it does is it's a model for disaster response in general, not just for outbreaks. It's a relatively complete dataset for a given pathogen. It has a data model that is enriching as the epidemic progresses. So initially, when the Zika virus came around, increased, then the data model on Wikidata was refined, and we could then express things at the more granular level. It has also triggered a number of tool developments, and it's used in technical tests and education. Here are a few more links on this. I'll get back to COVID-19 later on. So once we have topic tags, we can do things like we can get the list of most recently published works on the topic. Of course, these dates are not very relevant anymore. So here we're talking about the principle. And also we can look at which topics co-occur with a certain topic. So if the topic is Zika virus, then we see here, for instance, the topic of congenital Zika virus infection is very prominent. Zika fever, pregnancy, and microcephaly. These are all topics that co-occur, so that are discussed together with the topic of the Zika virus. And that is a way to browse things. So if you don't know much about the topic, you just go there, you start from the Zika virus, and then you can explore all those other things that are linked to it. Then what we can also do is link the discussions of the topics with certain locations, because some of those topics will have a geolocation. Like India, we had in those most popular topics, we had India as one example, and India has a geolocation. But some of those co-occurring topics, they will discuss things like the Zika virus in India, or in French Polynesia, or in Brazil, or something like this. And we can pull this out of the data by mapping the papers to the topics, and then the topics to their geolocation if they are entities that have a geolocation. I want to contrast this to this map, which shows the locations of the authors of papers on the topic. So in the previous one, we had the locations of topics, or topics that co-occur with the Zika virus. And here we have the locations of the authors of papers about the Zika virus. And so these are different things. We can plot them. We can pull that out of the data that is curated in Wikidata through the WikiCite community and tool chains. And that allows us to explore certain gaps. So for instance, here in Africa, there's not much happening according to this map, which might be first that there is not much research on the Zika virus happening in Africa or in much of Northern Asia, or simply that here there is not a lot of population anyway, or that we just haven't curated the data about the publications or about the authors or their affiliations or their geolocations very comprehensively. And these are the kinds of things that the community then has to drill down on in order to find out and to improve the data set. Now on to author disambiguation. So the basic strategy is, if there is an ORCID which is meant to help with author disambiguation, then and the ORCID has public data that is actually usable for Wikidata, then we try to use it. We have some tooling for this. There were some problems with that, so it doesn't really work well for the moment. That's also some discussion we need to have. And also the ORCID data is not always best quality, but at least it is there. It's a principal standard that the research community has agreed on to support. And so if you want to map research, then that's something we should take into account. The disambiguation on Wikidata can be done by anyone, just like any other kind of activity on the platform, and just like on Wikipedia. We have a number of mechanisms for quality control. We have some tools for this that are actually dedicated for author disambiguation. And we encourage institutions to disambiguate the people that are affiliated with them, because they know best, or the people themselves, of course, also know. But an ordinary Wikidata volunteer might not really know the start time and end time when some professor was affiliated with a certain research institution. And then if we consider like that there have been author basically, then and many of which have many authors, then this becomes a humongous challenge. But thinking about this shouldn't kind of occupy our thoughts too much, as long as we find some mechanisms to prioritize properly. So here's one of the tools in action. It's called the author disambiguator, and it can be used to basically convert author name strings into author identified authors. So the author here, Rosa Prato, has an identifier on Wikidata already that is associated with 9 items at the moment when this screenshot was taken. And then here we have 83 publications that list the name Rosa Prato as an author name string. And then the question is, to what extent do the publications that show this author name string actually correspond to publications that have been written by this person that is identified here? And the tool basically asks this question and helps with the grouping and suggests, and so that's one of the mechanisms by which author disambiguation can happen. Subject affiliation. So in order to find out the affiliation for a given person, we can search in Wikidata, or we can search elsewhere by university or by organization, and we can get information such as the faculty and their publications, or research sites and clinical trials that these people have been involved in, or events such as conferences and locations where these people have interacted or have shown up. And if we do affiliation tagging, then we can basically do similar things that I showed for the Zika map before. And that allows us to, for instance, look into areas where a certain topic is well represented. So here, the data here is for Italy. You see that there is a certain gradient in terms of publications that have Italy as a subject. In Italy, there's a lot of papers about Italy, and the further you go away, the fewer papers there are. And that also, the mapping here also serves as one mechanism by which we can do quality control. One example I would like to point out is there's Vanderbilt University in the United States that actually does this curation of the affiliation at a very systematic level. So they have figured out who is currently basically affiliated with the university. they've gotten all their ORCID identifiers, and they have fed that information into Wikidata. And that allows them and everybody else now to basically browse the information that is available about publications by Vanderbilt University people, staff mostly, and faculty, but also occasionally students. And the work that they are still working on is like linking these people to the publications. And that's also something that is part of the community workflows. So they really try to integrate their efforts with the community workflows. I put in some links here to first some news item about this, the bot that made all this possible, and similar projects at Indiana University, the University of Canary Islands, and also there's a countrywide similar effort for the Netherlands. Some other things that we haven't talked about too much in previous WikiCite events is clinical trials. These are also things that you can cite, and they produce citable things, and they are about certain topics. They have authors, they have primary investigators, and these kind of things. And so these are things, entities that are part of the curation workflow. And we're now relatively complete with respect to clinical trials that are registered in the United States. We're trying to increase the coverage of clinical trials that are registered in other places. So here is an attempt at representing the Wikidata ecosystem, which I described as a socio-technical system in one of my opening slides. So here we have a layer of users that are using a number of tools to interact basically with the basic infrastructure, Wikidata and Wikibase. And some of those users are automated, and most of them are humans. And some of the tools, they are used more or less for reading, others for writing, and others for like mixed matters. So one tool allows, Histopedia allows you to basically visualize timelines. Scholia allows you to visualize connections that are roughly related to scholarly literature or to research context in general. Quick Statements is a tool to edit Wikidata. Mix and Match is a tool to also edit Wikidata and to map things from Wikidata to external databases. Recoin helps with quality control. Yeah. Another way to look at these tools is they facilitate browsing, like this Wikidata front end that is specific for basically software. They allow to edit Wikidata in various ways. So here, if you have an identifier for publication, you can put that into source metadata tool, and then it will check whether that publication is already indexed, and if not, it will help you set up the corresponding item. And a large set of tools is actually there to check consistency, data quality, and these kind of things. So for instance, for statements about symptoms, we have a requirement that whatever is stated as a value here, it should be supported by a reference, and if that is not the case, then a warning is displayed. There's an overview of all the tools here on this page. For the Scholia tool specifically, we also have a category on commons, and there are similar categories for some of the other tools. I don't have time for that. There will be a dedicated session on Scholia later today. Now back to the citation questions. So here is a graph that is available on this website that's operated by one of the organizers of this session. And what it shows is two different developments here until, well, somewhere in the middle of this year. One of them is the number of publication items, which goes up in more or less in jumps, but steadily, roughly. The few occasions where it goes down, they're actually acts of active curation, where someone, for instance, noticed, oh, we already have this publication. It was started based on the digital object identifier, but here, and it was started based on the PubMed identifier there, and they're actually about the same thing, so we can connect them. And so these acts of curation are sometimes visible in those stats here. And here, what we also have here is the number of citations. I mentioned the number of 170 something million or so at the beginning. And we here see that it has basically plateaued for like a year or so, then it went down. And this is again is an act of curation. The problem is, or at least something to discuss, is what's the future trajectory here? We don't really currently have that data, but it's clear it's not going up very strongly. And the question is whether it should, or whether that is something that should take place somewhere else. There are a number of bots that are active in this space. Vanderbilt is basically underlying the Vanderbilt project that I outlined before. Large dataset bot is essentially curating publication items, so it checks whether items for certain publications are already indexed in Wikidata, and if not, it creates those items. RefBot is perhaps closest to the original, let's say, goal outlined in 2016, that we want to basically support the references or support every statement in Wikimedia projects with suitable references. And so what the RefBot does is it picks certain statements in Wikidata that do not have a reference yet, and then searches the literature for places where this statement might have been made, and then adds relevant literature as a reference to support this statement. So for the statement that local anesthesia is a subclass of anesthesia, we now have two sources that were added by RefBot. There's also a proposal for Open Citations bot, but this is pending. So technically, it's kind of doable, but still not done. And socially, we don't really know yet whether we actually want to do it in Wikidata or not. That's part of the discussion that events like this want to facilitate. So also important to think about the event history a little bit, because yeah, we're beginning another event right now, and so I want us to kind of come into the mindset for this kind of event thing. It's different now because it's all virtual, but yeah, let's think about this nonetheless a little bit. So in these previous three conferences, we had a 3-day design typically, where we tried to combine monologues like the one I'm doing right now with more dialogue-oriented sessions, and then with a hackathon. And we have elements of all three of these in the current program and in the other WikiCite activities. I'll outline some of those. This week's virtual conference, actually, I would have liked to include a screenshot of the Scholia page for this, but it wasn't detailed enough. So I'm just encouraging you to take a look and help curate that part. Also, I noticed that for WikiCite 2016, we don't have the information very well curated yet. So let's focus on the WikiCite 2020 events. So we're in this current session from 10 to 11 UTC. You see there are a number of other sessions coming up today. I guess if you are here in this talk, you already know roughly about this, but I really encourage you to use some of the breaks here to go through the entire basically schedule, because there are so many different things. They differ not just by location, but they differ by language. They differ by the kind of topic focus. Like here, we have Swedish parliamentary documents. In Indonesia here, for instance, they're discussing palm leaf documents. They're differing in terms of the technical aspects. So here we have a hands-on introduction on like how you can actually edit Wikidata. Then here is curation of author items. Here is the front end of WikiCite. Here is things that are specific to genetics, and so on. There are lots of such sessions, and the the aim of doing them is to foster collaboration. Since all of this is open, everybody can interact with all of these projects, and that's one of the mechanisms by which this WikiCite community thrives. We normally had pushes and activity right after the WikiCite events, and hopefully this will happen for this virtual one as well. In terms of other activities, I would also like to mention that we have set up a mechanism to award some grants and e-scholarships that are related to WikiCite events, and they are somewhat of an adaptation to the COVID times. So normally, I mentioned we would have had a hackathon in this conference setting, 3-day conference setting. But since the normal way of doing a hackathon means we bring multiple people into the same room, that's not possible these days. We basically thought about a mechanism by which we could give people some time to work on, and that's the e-scholarships approach. So the things that they could have done during a 3-4 day hackathon, they're now part of those e-scholarships. We also have a number of grants that are a bit larger scale projects, but still doable in a matter of a few weeks to months. And here is a blog post that details all of them. Again, one of them is about the leaves from the palm leaves from Indonesia, but there's 23 of them, and they're much more diverse than the projects that we have discussed at the previous WikiCite meetings. In terms of coordination, so WikiCite is driven by volunteers in all of its aspects, including the organization of this session and this conference, and all of the content work and tool development. But some coordination needs to happen, and in typical Wiki style, much of this coordination happens in a variety of channels. Still, we have an organizing committee or steering committee, and this is basically the same team that has been active over the last few years. We had a few members change, but we're constantly looking for new members. We want to facilitate WikiCite activities in different locations, in different languages, on different topics, on different technical contexts. And so if any of that resonates with you, please get in touch and consider joining the steering committee. So that's now the first thank you slide. I think it's important to thank you. One of the things I like best about the Wikimedia, let's say, ecosystem is actually that we have a thank you button on all the different platforms, or on most of them. And that is a very interesting aspect of forming a community. It's not visible other than to the person that is being thanked, at least by default. And so it is not normally gamed, and so it's a very nice thing here. I just want to thank everyone. I don't like that phrase, still I use it, and so I'm also spelling it out. I want to thank the providers of open infrastructure, not just the Wikimedia open infrastructure, but open infrastructure in general, including the one that we interact with. The providers of this citation or this presentation template from Slides Carnival, the Wikimedia, Wikidata, and WikiCite communities. I would especially like to thank the Scholia team, because that's the team I'm most closely interacting with on a daily basis. I would like to thank the Alfred Sloan Foundation that sponsors the WikiCite events. And I would like to thank the organizers of WikiCite events. Like, if you're organizing any session or here at this conference or somewhere else, if you did that in the past, if you plan it in the future, I want to thank you for just thinking about it, and especially if you've done it, for doing it. And then if you've made it until here, I want to thank you for paying some attention to these topics. Now I'm looking forward to the discussion. Let's see what the Etherpad says. If you want to contact me, here are some contact details. And now I'm trying to hop into the Etherpad.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. You're well in time. So we have some questions. Very well. We look it up here in the Etherpad. Yeah. So the first is, could WikiCite provide an alternative to commercial bibliographic search engines? What do you think?
Okay, it would be helpful if you mention the question that you also show the, tell me the line number. Peter, eventually, yes, I hope so, but currently it's an alternative only for very specific things. Like if you want to know something about the Zika virus or something, I would guess for certain things the Zika corpus on Wikidata is more, or is annotated in a better or more detailed fashion than the standard that you get from the commercial search engines. But in general, they are, for many purposes, still better, in part because they have money to put at this, and WikiCite is largely driven by volunteers who do it in their spare time. And so what we do have is a community. They don't have that. And the question then is, what is the niche for both of those? So since we're entirely open, anyone is entitled to benefit from our curation efforts. That includes the commercial providers of this. And so one of the main purposes of WikiCite is actually to increase the quality of the information that is available through such search engines. So if anyone has access to the Wikidata version of it or WikiCite version of it, then whatever those commercial offerings are, they should be better. And so that's a short answer, but the question is deep and we could have an entire discussion around it.
So it, in any case, depends on the topic.
Yes, it depends on the topic. For a number of topics, especially in humanities or so, Wikidata doesn't have a lot of information at the moment. This is due to several structural and community biases, and we're working on them. We're aware of some of those biases, but still they are there. And of course, the search engines have their own biases as well. So for particular, like I hope like in half a year from now, the palm leaves collection, for instance, from Indonesia will be in Wikidata, and I don't see them showing up in any of the commercial search engines anytime soon. But maybe they pick it up from Wikidata. That would also be progress. That would make research the information more widely available.
Okay. So next question, a question of mine about topic tagging. So where do these topics tags come from? It's not that easy like with author, the date of publication, because topics are a bit less hard facts. What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's actually something I'm thinking about quite often. I think the current workflows that we have are not very mature. So there are lots of workflows, typically in library contexts, where topic tagging is already happening. So for instance, the database PubMed for biomedicine has an entire system called the MESH terms, medical subject headings, which uses basically human readers, so humans reading a paper. They then decide which terms to associate with that paper, and they choose those terms from a defined controlled vocabulary called the MESH terms. And that system exists, but we haven't found mechanisms to leverage that for Wikidata, in part because Wikidata is cross-disciplinary, and so even if we had this working for PubMed, this wouldn't help us much in terms of covering publications in history or astronomy or elsewhere. And so there is no system that is cross-disciplinary, which means that there is actually an opportunity for Wikidata to become the first cross-disciplinary platform to have a consistent mechanism of tagging. Right now, we don't have it. So what we do have is often just based on inferences from the title, which might run into problems when the tagging is based on ambiguous terms. Or when the tagging is performed by someone who doesn't know the subject very well or something like this. All of this happens. All of this also happens to me. But the good thing about this is, since we're curating into an open platform, everyone can check what has been done. Everyone can point out problems with that. Some of those checks are even automatic. And then we can work together to reduce the number of false positives, false tags. And we can also think about what the best granularity of the tags is. So if we, for instance, go back to the mesh example of the mesh terms, they come with their own hierarchy. Some of that hierarchy is already reflected in Wikidata. And so if a paper is associated with a number of mesh terms that are in a hierarchy, then the question is, should we take all of them, or should we just take the most specific ones? And that's the kind of questions. And for other topic tagging, let's say, contexts, the workflows might differ again.
Okay, thanks.
Just a short interruption as I'm here for the technical side. Can you please close those pop-up tabs? Yes, thank you.
I was going to do it when I had a minute, but since I was talking all the time, it took me a while. Okay, yeah. Next one. Shall we just go by the order, or do you have some pre-selection?
We have time.
Yeah. Could help the author disambiguation.
So how does the author disambiguation work?
Yeah, so the author disambiguator is a tool that was specifically designed for assisting with the conversion of the strings that we get in terms of authorship from various databases. And so the conversion from those strings into Wikidata identifiers. Typical example is Jane Smith or something like this. There might be many of them, or Xing Wang or something like this. Many people have this name or are using this name in publications or this string. And then in Wikidata, we have to figure out which one is which person is the author of that paper, and so on. And this tool that I briefly demoed helps with that. In principle, it could be adapted to do all sorts of string disambiguation, but that hasn't happened. And maybe it will not happen in the framework of this tool, because this tool has this particular purpose. But it's open source. Everybody is welcome to contribute. Everybody is welcome to fork it and to develop it into another direction. This tool is actually itself a fork of an earlier version of the tool. You could imagine lots of other string disambiguation being useful. I think the ticket that I have in mind here is to use it on things like or on policy documents. Yeah, there are lots of options, but if you want to work this well, and for authors it works really well for the moment, then it needs some development, and so it's not just adding a line of code in order to make it, let's say, cover other kinds of disambiguations as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Arthur has already replied to that. That's nice. So yeah, I can only read so much. So yeah, that's one of the purposes of having this Etherpad. That's very nice. That someone posts the question, someone responds while I'm talking. That's fine. That makes the discussion more efficient. Maybe then you can guide me a little bit what things I should talk about. I see.
Yeah, I think there was a question about Open Refine, but we will hear about this later in the event. So more down.
Yeah. Open Refine, I wanted to mention it at several points in the slides, but for some reason, if I haven't done this, this is certainly an omission. It was not intended. Open Refine is one of those tools, and it can basically refine it. It helps reducing the noise in the data if you want to map strings to items, and it's very powerful. For certain workflows, it has become more or less the de facto WikiCite tool.
Yeah.
And for other contexts, it has not been explored too much, but there are dedicated sessions on this later.
Okay, so there was another good question. So where in Wikipedia is Wikidata, WikiCite data used? So the idea, so we have all bibliographic data in Wikidata, and it's automatically shown in Wikipedia. Does it happen?
I think there have been tests, demos, and explorations in various places. I think in Russian and maybe even in French, and Catalan, Basque, something like this. But I'm not aware of anything doing this systematically, for a number of reasons. And yeah, briefly sketching them out is first, not necessarily all the references cited in any Wikipedia are already indexed in Wikidata. That's one thing. Maybe we're coming close, or we have a certain degree of completeness for scholarly references that have a digital object identifier, but for anything, articles, for instance, and things like that. So that's one thing. So if you want to use Wikidata for running these basically citation sections in your Wikipedia articles, then it would be nice to have higher coverage, which is one of the original motivations for doing WikiCite. But that would require for WikiCite/Wikidata to develop better or more robust data models and tooling around those other kinds of things, for instance, around newspapers. And there are efforts in this direction, but they're not necessarily as mature so that a Wikipedia could use them at scale as a default. I think Wikidata is ready to be used for experimentation, let's say, for a certain topic, anything related to Zika, for instance. In those areas, I would actually love to see those experiments. Let's try to replace all the references in Zika-related articles. Most Wikipedias have just one or a few of those articles, and so let's try to start with those articles, and then let's see what the problems are. Some books will pop up, and policy documents will pop up, and then we solve those problems, and then we can think about scaling this up.
So go on Wikipedians. It's a wiki. Try out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wiki.
Above there was a question about living persons. So is there some procedure to prevent that personal information is added despite the people do not want it?
Can you tell me the line number?
35.
35. Okay. Okay, so someone already posted a comment. So I kind of jumped over this question, and I had seen that Arthur had responded to it, and someone said this is not really answered yet. Okay, so I'll briefly read it. Okay. So yeah, some people do not want their data to be exposed in Wikidata, and in certain jurisdictions, there are legal protections for the kind of personal data. And Wikimedia projects in general, they have some policy around which or how to handle personal data. In general, the situation is such that if someone does not want their information to appear in Wikidata or Wikipedia, then that's a strong incentive to actually remove that, unless there is a public interest in keeping that public. Like about this particular fact that the person wants to be removed, then it will likely stay, but otherwise it will likely be removed. And if that's not the case, then there are mechanisms to address that. But since the information, once it was in the system, it cannot easily be deleted. It can just be like removed from the current version by default. Really removing it from the system is a bit more effort, involves administrators, but also that can be done and has been done on occasion.
Yeah, so it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, so last chances for questions, please. So we have another question here in the Etherpad line 49 about newspaper, information about newspapers. I would like to extend the question about information about books, because you mainly talked about scientific articles. So there are other publications too. What about them?
Yeah, I know that in your statistics, you're compiling a list of like hundreds of different types of publications, including patents and poems and things like that. And yeah, the general answer to this is that there have been relatively lots of efforts in the journal article space, not even the journals, just the journal articles. There have also been lots of efforts in the book space. They haven't translated into tools too much. We have one good tool for books, which is Inventaire, which I also didn't mention. But that's not because I don't like it. It's just because I had to kind of prioritize here. Also, that tool Inventaire has to make some compromises in terms of data model, so it doesn't distinguish too much between an edition of a work and the work in general. So if we don't have the workflow, well, we have the data model roughly figured out for books, but we don't have the workflows to pull that information from elsewhere to put it into Wikidata, for instance. And that's in part because the resources that would have the data, they are not public domain, so we can't feed on them directly. But in part because nobody has written those tools, and in part because the data model isn't really fully adapted to the particular use case you might be interested in. Yeah, I'm aware of a number of activities in the newspaper space. Still nothing that is like large scale or transferable between languages or countries, for instance, or something like this. So yeah, I see there is an Australian newspaper project. I was somewhat involved in a US newspaper project, for instance, but still it's not as homogeneous as we have it for the scholarly articles, because that is based on a digital object identifier for which there is a standard, and for newspapers there is just not such a standard that I'm aware of. And for poems and other things, it's getting even more complex. Something I haven't mentioned yet, but I would also like to see is, for instance, Jupyter notebooks. For anything that is about an algorithm or a programming language, it would be nice to have some sort of a demo of that aspect of the algorithm or of the programming language demoed in a Jupyter notebook, and that Jupyter notebook should then also be cited in some fashion, but we don't have the mechanisms for that either. The book tool, the Jupyter notebook tool, is that Dr. Thneed here, the thing that you're talking about? Yeah, I'll just...
You just add the link to the tool you mentioned, yeah?
I hope that's... I was speaking about books in general as well, so I'm not sure whether that's the one that I wanted to know about.
Yeah. There's also Zotero, a Zotcard. It will be presented on tomorrow in the session at 10 UTC. So a lot of tools.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I will go through the Etherpad once I'm disconnected here and try to answer whatever remains of the questions. And otherwise, I guess you all have my contact info. I'm happy to address further questions this way. And I also plan to attend some of the other sessions. And so I hope that everyone will enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
We are running out of time, I have to say, from the technical side. Do you want to extend for 10 more minutes, or how do you want to behave?
I'm fine. I think if there are further questions, I'm happy to continue. Right now, all the questions that I'm aware of, I've at least briefly touched upon.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm being corrected on what I said about Inventaire. Yeah, so it's always good that the experts are around. That's the beauty of an open system. Everything can be verified. That's the nugget, the core of WikiCite. Everything is verifiable, so yeah, I guess Max is putting the details in here.
Okay, so please keep on asking here or in the next sessions. We are happy to have opened this virtual conference. The next session will start in 2 hours. And yeah, have a look at the program. You will see Eva and me, both of us, in the next session tomorrow at 10. Am I right, Eva? Okay. So, again, thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
And see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.